cosplaying for?
I've been cosplaying since, oh goodness, give me one moment, brain's like, I don't know, I've been cosplaying forever. 2014, and I've won 7 craftsmanship awards, and I believe 4 or 5 performance awards. I'm also a judge in the Masquerades, so I've done quite a few different things, and I'm from, like I said, Arizona, so hi. We're good, we're recording.
We good.
I might have to take breaks occasionally, but we're good.
And can you guys look back your thermo clearly good? Okay. Acoustics have been interesting this weekend.
Do I need to? You mean move that
Okay,
closer?
so this is what we're going through today. We're gonna explain what is cosplay competition, if you're competing in a group or alone, building your cosplay for the competition, how to do a build book and what they expect, how judging works, your performance and or walk-on, and how awards work. So starting off, what is a cosplay competition? So it's making a cosplay to the highest standard of craftsmanship that you can achieve at current. And that includes finishing things the best you can, and when you are deciding to do a competition, check your convention's rules, because each convention will have not necessarily completely different rules, but there are a lot of small differences between competitions, such as some allow original design, which is designing your own kind of costume rather than going from a reference image, which is more common.
You also will see different sets of percentages. Some conventions say you have to build 60% or more, and then as you go up in your categories from novice to journeyman to masters, it's going to go up to like 80 or 90. Some conventions are just straight across the board, 70%. So always double check your rules to see what percentage of the costume you need to be building to meet their standards.
And some of them also have rules about you're not permitted to use a costume that you competed in previously, even if you're raising it up another level. So make sure that you're paying very close attention.
Mm-hmm. Always double, triple check your rules.
And if you're not sure, email your cosplay contest coordinator.
We will always answer you back.
Yes.
Most of the time.
You have a question?
Yeah, you were saying percentage of cosplay. Is that done, or is that how much you have to have done yourself in order to compete?
So,
good question.
Generally, like, okay, I think SakuraCon is 60% of the costume must be made by you. So that is and that's for novice. And that is completely from scratch, as in building an EVA piece from the ground up, or starting with a sewing pattern and making it that way. It's a bit of a gray area to figure out what that percentage is, because like if you have, example, a school uniform, there's really not a heck of a lot to that. So having made like the fuku top and the collar and the skirt, but buying the shoes, the socks, the wig, and some other accessories, that would probably work for 60%, but it can be very subjective, and if you're not sure, email your coordinator to make sure.
And then you're talking about percentage done. In Arizona, for instance, I'm already prejudging for our costume contest that doesn't happen until June 3rd. So some of them you have to have 75% done 2 months out. Some of them it has to be 100% complete upon submission. So those will all be in the rules too.
You'll see that with like Emerald City Comic Con does it that way. You have to have certain percentage check marks as you go to kind of keep you in the running. SakuraCon, on the other hand, you just have, when you submit, you're just submitting a handful of pictures proving that you are working on the piece. But it's only like 3 pictures.
And you usually can get
it's not too
exceptions
bad.
too. If you're really far along and it's just a very complex piece, you can usually go, hey, can I get an exception, and in a couple weeks provide you more, and most of the time they will allow it too.
And generally, conventions are organized in 2 different breakdowns. Now this isn't for every convention, but this is the most common thing we see. So you'll have your novice, which is people first entering costume contests, or if they've entered before and haven't won anything, you can usually stay a novice for quite a while. Again, it depends on your convention's rules, because some say if you've made more than 10 costumes, you can't enter novice. Again, it's a rule thing, so don't just assume you're going to be placed somewhere. Check the rules before you actually enter. Journeyman and Intermediate is your next step up.
We are both journeyman cosplayers, by the way.
They mean the same thing. It's a regional interchangeable word. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. And then masters are people who have won a plethora of awards or do costume building as a job. But again, your convention will have those rule requirements, and again, they're not the same across the board.
And honestly, I just recommend always reaching out if you are unsure which category you fit into. Because a lot of people, since I've been in the scene a lot and I do a lot of performances, almost everybody in the green room assumes I'm a masterwork. But the thing is, my sewing isn't that good. Like, I have been sewing a long time, but I'm really bad at finishing things. But my skits and my performances, yeah, right, I'm sorry to call you out. But like my skits and performances are higher level. And so a lot of people, when they see me, are like, well, why aren't you in Masters? I'm like, because I've never won an award for a journeyman. I'm still shitty.
That makes it loud.
Sorry. So it's honestly just like, if you are looking and they're like, oh, you've made more than 10 costumes, so you are automatically in the Masters category. You can shoot an email to the presenter and be like, okay, well, I don't have any awards in this category, or I've only worked on these things, and like I've been in performances, but not under craftsmanship. Can I still ask to compete in Journeyman? So then it's fair to you. Because if you know you are not the master level, you're just gonna shoot yourself in the foot by forcing yourself to be into that category.
Yeah, and we will touch more on this at the end, but if you have won awards at like smaller conventions that don't have many participants, there sometimes are workarounds with larger competitions that you're not shoved into a bracket that you're not ready for. On the other hand though, skill breakdown is less common, but a lot of smaller conventions do it. I've seen it done at KingCon, and PenCon does this as well, because it's, in my opinion, more beginner friendly, because you're not required to build absolutely everything. You will get more points if you build absolutely everything, or like the vast majority of things, but a specific skill is being looked at. And generally, if you win something in a skill breakdown, you usually don't have to like move up to journeyman immediately, but again, that's check your competition rules, because they all will be different. Anything else for you guys?
No, I think that's pretty
Yeah,
good. You covered it, yeah.
Okay. And then should you compete in a group or individually? There are pros and cons to both.
Oh, yeah.
And they do have to be treated in a bit of a different way, just because of the collaboration and requirements of both.
And honestly, when you start working with other peoples, it can get hard very quickly. And even if you think they're your best friend in the whole world and you would never bite their head off, when you're in the middle of con crunch at 2 a.m., 2 days before the competition, weird stuff happens.
Yeah, so if you decide to do individual, you have complete control about how you are building your cosplay. You can use whatever skills you want. You can just go to the fabric store and pick out whatever you want. I mostly sew, that's why I say lots of fabric things. This also works for EVA and whatnot. And you are the only one to be holding yourself accountable, or your costume contest coordinator who's like, give me these things by this time or you're out. Group, on the other hand, has to be approached differently in a lot of situations. And I do want to give a bit of a warning that if you do decide to do a group cosplay, check everybody's intentions first. I have a situation where I thought I was cosplaying with some friends and we were competing together and having fun. And then when things got tough life-wise, they dropped me. So you want to make sure everybody's expectations are on the table. And if you're all just cosplaying together purely because you like the series and want to do either a performance or building something, that's totally fine. Just make sure everybody's intentions are clear beforehand to avoid any sort of miscommunication or problems down the road. That being said though, there's a lot more to competing as a group because you have a lot more things to consider. So example, if you're doing a Critical Role cosplay, and there's very few overlapping items or techniques, you can treat it more like an individual cosplay where one person does their own thing, another person does their own thing, but maybe you guys decide, oh, well, we're gonna use the same paint for this thing, so they have the same sheen on stage, for example. But if you're doing something like an idol group or a Sailor Moon group, where your costumes are a lot more similar and have very similar elements, generally it's favored during judging if you all use the same base fabric, just in different colors. And actually, another thing with groups, you have to enter the highest level
Of the highest member.
Yes, so if your group has one master and 2 novices, those novices automatically are masters because your highest group member is masters.
It's very difficult sometimes too, because especially if it's someone who's their first time on stage, and that particular con doesn't allow a dress rehearsal, practicing is critical so that they can get comfortable. I mean, I honestly, anytime somebody in my group has never been on stage but really, really wants to be in the group no matter what and works very hard, we make them go out in public in their costumes. We make them go to the grocery store, do weird things, so they get used to possible responses from a crowd.
That's cute.
So, like, you're gonna go to the gas station, you're gonna go fill up your car, then you're gonna walk in and buy something, and just twirl out really sassy, and then go. You're good.
But this can also, like, for us, this is actually a really big contention that we have a lot of issues with, because some cons will allow us to enter in our individual categories but still use our walk-on. So like our skit is our walk-on, so we're kind of treated individually.
It's not common much anymore.
Yeah, we tend to email the coordinator and be like, how much can we get away with? Because I'm just a journeyman, but whenever we compete together, I'm suddenly bumped up in masters, and that shoots us both in the foot.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you do decide to do that kind of thing where everybody has different skill levels, I have found it beneficial to assign people tasks. So if it's a Sailor Moon group, one person makes all of the bows. The other person makes different pieces so they're all the same across the board. And if I say that, but if there's a bunch of distance between the competitors, like if you're in different countries or states, it's a lot harder. So having discussions of, are we all buying the same fabric, or are we buying similar fabric, and deciding on the techniques being used before starting, you'll have a better cohesive group in that respect.
And task splitting is wonderful, especially if you might not be super good at sewing, but you just excel at prop and paint. You can just divide and conquer, because if the seamstress is sitting there trying to paint these intricate details, they're gonna cry and have to repaint it 5 times. And then you have the master painter who is like, give me that, and then they're done in 2 minutes. You're like, that took me all day.
You're also going to want to consider budget for people.
Yeah.
Because not everybody has the same privilege as others. So I always want to have my group say who's comfortable with paying what. And I have the privilege, I've worked really hard to say, okay, well, this is our deficit, I'll cover that deficit so that we can all have the same material. But not everybody can do that, so sometimes you have to step down in a material just to make sure everyone is matching, and that's okay. You can use other inexpensive tools and skills to uplift
Don't
it.
Usually judge by the type of fabric you use, unless it's really not right for the piece.
Right.
If, let's say your budget is the kind of shinier, silkier, thinner fabric, if you guys still use that fabric for all of the pieces and did the technique really well, you're gonna get a bunch of Buko points versus everybody having kind of mixed matched not as clean finishes, the people with the cheaper fabric are gonna win because they have a cleaner finish.
I think we're pretty good with groups and individual.
Perfect. So now on to building. In the wise words of AK Weekly, if you need to con crunch, please crunch early. And this
We've
also-
been doing this for like 10 years and learned this last year.
Yeah. No, and that goes into like scheduling yourself. It's usually fairly beneficial to come up with a timeline of these are the times when we need to get these specific things done, and holding either if you're doing individual yourself to these standards, or if you're doing a group holding each other to, did you get your thing done by this date? And if you know you need to crunch, do it the week before, if you can, because you want to be well rested and able to enjoy your convention, not stressed as heck because you've been sewing the night before. And I know that's really hard, but if you can, try and employ this technique. It's very helpful.
Sometimes it's nice to have like the buddy system though, just like if you're doing a group thing, maybe pick like once a month where you guys stay up late and work together. Even if it's just streaming together, just be like, okay, we both have Wednesday off, so Tuesday after work, let's just sit and work as long as we can keep our eyes open and just get a chunk of time done. And then you're holding each other accountable, you're working together, and you guys are getting that con crunch. Like my favorite technique is like a couple times a month or like once a week, working on the project with who I'm working with, and picking that like the longer times earlier in the build than later.
Well, and the one thing to think about, if you do find that your schedule's at a point where you're going to have to crunch no matter what, do the things that you're most unfamiliar with first, and the stuff that you find easiest and comforting last, because it's easier to crunch things that don't stress you out.
When you're tired and you're trying to learn a new technique, it's never gonna go right.
Yeah, that brings us to building for the competition. So you'll be doing your best to make whatever you're making as cleanly as humanly possible. So your finishing would be, if it's like EVA, no glue marks. If it's fabric, everything completely finished, whether it's serging your seams, enclosing your seams in bias tape, French seaming, and make sure when you are building your cosplay, centered around something that you are good at. There's been so many times when I've taken on too much and I am very unfamiliar with the techniques, and I've ended up with a frustrating dumpster fire and had to restart. So, like example, I'm really good with dyeing. So I find costumes and I'm like, I love that character. They have a bunch of different colors, let's go for it.
I'm the opposite, and when I first started competing, I literally went, what do I want to learn how to do? And then I would pick a technique that I had never done before, and then cry over how hard it was, and then later realize that I was losing points because I did not have clean finishes. I was basically giving them my 10th mock-up because I didn't know what I was doing yet. Now I try to pick a piece that I'm like, I'm super comfortable with EVA wigs, like that's my favorite thing. So I'll pick a costume I'm like, I'm really confident. Like one of my next builds is probably gonna be Aurum from the new Critical Role. I really love armor, and it's something I really wanna do, but I've never airbrushed, so I'm doing an armor piece I'm confident in building, but I'm learning airbrushing to get the detailing in there. And that's gonna be my new technique I can talk to the judges about, but I know the piece itself is gonna look really pretty, even if I don't do a very good paint job.
Yeah, and my character selections, I love body makeup and special effects. I'm really good with silicone and crazy effects. So I always try to find a character that you're like, that's impossible. I'm like, yes, absolutely. I will make gravity-defying shoulders, breasts, butts, eyes. I will do whatever's possible. I'm ready.
And it's really interesting also from an audience perspective that a lot of costumes that are big and have a lot of techniques, they look very impressive. And sometimes you might be wondering, well, why didn't they win? They looked really good. And a lot of the times, it's because while the build looked very impressive on stage, there were a lot of issues with the craftsmanship. And that's generally why I like to say more techniques doesn't necessarily mean better. If they're techniques you're good at, totally fine if you execute them super well. But if you have a bunch of new techniques and they don't work out, And outwardly, your costume looks pretty dang good, but inside you have shredded seams, or things aren't finished nicely, or like, especially when you're sewing satin, some satins wrinkle and like pull really easy if you don't have the correct machine tension. That's another thing the judges would be looking for, that just because far away it looks good, if they're up close and it doesn't, that definitely can be an issue. And it's nice to see that with new venues and whatnot, there's more, I'm sorry, I'm so tired.
This is panel number 5 for us this weekend, by the way. Sorry, we're
Yeah.
dead.
So, in the past, like years and years ago, it's been hard to like accommodate people with like wheelchairs or like walkers or canes and stuff. And it's really nice to see that conventions are being more cognizant of actually having ramps and
Accommodations.
ways to get people up on stage, which is really wonderful. But this does also bring a few interesting things to the table in that respect. So, like example, if you are in a wheelchair, but you're doing a ball gown, obviously you can't make it the same way that you would if you were, standing up. As long as you are keeping the same amount of detail, I wish I remembered the cosplayer's name. She's kind of local. She made this princess, this beautiful,
Colleen cosplay?
probably, yeah, she
Yes,
made this
thank you.
beautiful Princess Serenity dress that had this really long train. But of course, she couldn't do that because of her wheelchair. So she shortened it, so it still had the same amount of detail, it just wasn't as long, which is an amazing way to still keep details while making it work for you. Another example would be like if you can't wear heels because of a foot issue, but your character has like these really detailed like high heel boots. If you take a pair of running shoes and make a cover for them that looks like the high heel boots that aren't high heeled, and you explain that to the judges to why you made that design choice, generally you're not going to lose points because you've actually done something, one, really smart, and two, you aren't compromising your own safety or ability by, doing something
Right,
that
something.
you
Well,
physically can't.
I'm doing a Turian from Mass Effect. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with that game, but they have digitigrade legs, and they have like these 2 toes at the bottom that they walk on. But I can't wear those because I have one leg shorter than the other, and so I wear inserts actually in my shoes to level it out, and I have to have specific ankle support in that leg. So I've purchased a pair of shoes that have clear, transparent heels on the back that are block and chunky, but from far away it looks like I'm suspended, and then I'm just adding a little padding to my knees to make it look like it's protruding out more, and all of a sudden I have digitigrade legs and they're not real. And so I don't have to wear stilts or modify myself or potentially hurt myself, because when you have stilts like that, you really have to have very even legs, and I don't, so I can't actually wear them.
Yeah, and if you do make changes like that, explain why to the judges, and generally they will understand.
Yeah, especially if you're accommodating something which made you do more work. Like, I love
Point that
Colleen. If you ever get a chance, go look her up on YouTube and on Instagram. She's got some really killer work. But she finds a really cool way to like make her wheelchair really part of her cosplay, and I applaud her for how much effort that takes. Because that's so much extra work, but she always looks great.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to touch on with building, if you can't do something a certain way and it's not working out, try a different technique or look for aids to overcome the problems that you're having. And so generally when you're building for competition, you're trying to make it as screen accurate as possible, and leaving details off just because I had trouble with it and couldn't do it will lose you points in judging. So if a technique isn't working for you, try a new one or do research on the technique to see if you are doing something.
Or maybe that's the
incorrect.
percentage of your costume that you don't create and you
Mhm.
purchase and commission someone for it because it's so difficult. So that's an option as well.
But
Yeah.
if you do want to continue trying, for example, I've seen this happen with applique, and I've done it myself, that I didn't research the technique before starting, and I didn't use a backing stabilizer or basting spray or fusible web, and I hated how it looked. But I wasn't using the technique correctly, so of course it's going to look like a hot garbage if I was not doing it correctly. And no amount of practice will make something look good if you are not employing the technique correctly. And it still doesn't work, try a different method. So example, embroidery, applique, vinyl, blinging, and painting are fairly interchangeable techniques on fabric for most things. So pick something that works for you, and if you're not great at what on one particular technique, try a different one.
A total example of this is one of my favorite pieces that still makes me cry to this day is I was making an extremely accurate Space Wolf, history major, so I get geeky about fabric. And I wanted to make her, she has a little wheat pouch that she has on her chest. And I was trying so hard to make it, and I probably made that like 10 times. And I just didn't like what it looked like because I was trying embroidery, and then I was trying just like applique, and then I was trying like weaving ribbon. Like I did it like every way I could possibly make that like historically might have been done, and they all made me cry, and I didn't like any of them. I ended up just giving up and then painting my fabric so it was dyed properly, and it looked really, really good. And I'm like, I'm happy with this. But it took me trying different techniques and realizing that sewing is not my strong point. So going back to my roots and falling back on the painting and painting the fabric was like, I really like how this turned out, and it was worth it, and it's one of my favorite pieces now.
So something else with competition that is not always required, but is very helpful.
Give you bonus points if you
Yes.
win.
So I didn't compete in SoccerCon's costume contest this year because I got waitlisted, so I actually was not 100% sure what they were requiring. I'm fairly certain everybody needs a build book, but I could be wrong, don't quote me. But basically, what a build book is a place to have your references and steps. So you want to have pictures of your character, like what you have used to create it, and also what you have used in the process. So what I like to do is have like a materials page. So before I do anything with any of my fabrics, I will swatch them. I've also included EVA pieces in there to show before and after. I've included like if embroidery, like thread samples, bling samples if I've done bling, just to show these are what went into the costume. And a lot of times the judges will not have time to read your build book. Yes, including some writing is beneficial, but please do not write them a novel. They will not read it. A lot of times pictures are more, because your judges should be skilled enough to understand what goes into what you're building, and they don't necessarily need that explained to them. So
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I'm going to be judging a con in 2 months, and our build books are digital. We've been trying to move further and further away from anything paper. We don't want people giving us paper. It's wasteful, and half the time someone sets it down and forgets it. So at the end of the night, we'll end up with a whole bunch of books that they just like, oh, I don't need it anymore. You can keep it. We don't need it either. So we've moved to a digital format, so everything goes into a Google Drive, and it's assigned to a person. And as a judge, the reason they give it to me 2 months out is so that I can go through every single photo, all the details, and use the judging sheet that they provided me with and start marking off what I'm actually seeing, write notes. So the day of, when I'm looking at their costume during prejudging, oh, by the way, I noticed this in your pictures. Can I see that? And it just kind of gives me little points that I can direct towards it.
Not all cons do this, but it is something that has been definitely a big movement, is moving into the digital. That's how SoccerCon does it. You have to submit everything into a Google Drive, and that's how the judges look at it. a very cool system, but it's a double check, because this is where I got myself messed up one time. Double check the exact way they want you uploading it online. Because if there is one thing wrong, like you made a mistake on the audio file you uploaded for your skit, or maybe you put the wrong file name, they will consider that wrong, and you'll be basically dropped back down to the bottom saying that you didn't do it properly. We're not gonna look at it until it's fixed. If there is a wait list or a line of cosplayers, and you had something wrong, and now you're in the back, you might not make it into that convention's competition. So very specifically with the digital ones, if they have examples of what they want your folder to look like, try to replicate that folder perfectly. So then there's no mistakes, and you know you're gonna get in. And if you do add stuff more afterwards, email your judges first.
And like some cons, like I've competed at LA Comic Con, and they required me to bring either a mobile device or something that I'd set on the table, they could peruse it, while 2 other judges came around and were physically looking at my outfit. So it depends on where you're going.
Yeah, and generally, don't include photos of anything that's like, once you hit about 75%, you don't wanna include photos of like, oh, it went from like here to here, unless something has changed extremely drastically. And a lot of things that are very beneficial are things that the judges cannot see just by like flipping your seams or looking inside. So if there's something you're really proud of that literally doesn't get seen, include that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're using Warbler or thermoplastic, you're not gonna see all the detail work.
I riveted these pants myself,
Yeah.
and the inside of these are ridiculously clean. So I take really good pictures of the inside of these pants going, look how pretty these are.
Yeah.
Because I'm so proud of these.
And prop work too, because think about it, if you've got a big prop, you're not gonna cut open a spot and let them look inside it. So you wanna take pictures while you're building it, so you can see what glues were used, how you stabilized it, stuff like that. Those are things that they're not going to be, hey, just strip down to your underwear, we're gonna look at everything. No, they're not gonna do that. We have no interest in doing that, but we're just going to check the small things, so taking pictures of the things we really are invisible.
One of the things I found really useful, for the last build I've been doing, Deuce, the Star Center outfit, I started, because there was a lot of mock-ups, and there was a lot of just like process photos, I started making collages. I got a free online phone app, and started putting my pictures in a collage and just marking mock-up 1, mock-up 2. So it looks a bit more like a physical build book, because that's how I do my physical build books, but digitally you just kind of upload a picture and it's there. So then I would make a collage of mock-up 1, mock-up 2, mock-up 3, mock-up 4, so they can see the differences together.
What collage app do you use?
So I've been using Cosgear. So Cosgear is a planning app that you can use. It's completely free. There's tons of tutorials and resources. It's the same app that you see the Cos tail and the ears from. They kind of come up with a lot of mechanical objects. But they have a new app that's online. It is very useful. I've also used Cos Planner as well, which is a mobile app. But both of those are useful.
Yeah, I just use like the Instagram layout, because it's free and it just combines
Layout's
all your
very
pictures.
useful.
And there's also just like, it's called like Photo Editor Pro. Whatever's the highest marked free one on Google. Like,
I just use whatever comes with my Samsung phone. I find it handy.
Yeah.
But with your books, organize it how it makes sense to you, but make sure it has a flow to it. So you can, example, group it with techniques that the headpiece and the shoes have like leather work on them.
I highly recommend checking out instructables.com and looking how the cosplayers document their builds for people to follow in the future. I have an Instructable, and I've had a lot of people go, hey, by the way, your build just helped me figure out how to document for my masquerade, so thanks. And it was just me going, half the time I document this to remember how I did it. So, because sometimes I'll go back, wait, how did I do that the last
and really, you just,
Okay.
if you're using the same technique over and over, you don't want to be like, oh, I did it with this, and then a little bit later I did it with this, and then a little bit later I did, like, you can just kind of put it all on the same
You can
page
see
and
how it
piece
evolves too over
pieces.
time. You're like, well, I started here, but then I found this really awesome product, and now I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times that build book will help you immensely with your judging. So organize it in a way that supports your talking points. Which brings us into the nitty gritty
Of
judging.
Mm-hmm.
So SoccerCon does it the day before. Not all conventions do that. Again, check your rules. Generally, you will have between 2.5 and 4 minutes to go through your entire costume.
because there's probably 50 or 60 people competing, and but I mean entries competing, because it could also be groups. So yeah,
Yeah, groups can get more time.
maybe up to 5 minutes. Maybe.
SoccerCon sometimes does 10 minutes, depending on
All the cons I've been into in the
how-
Southwest is no more than 5. So,
yeah, it's again depends on the
D23 it was 2.
Hmm?
D23 group of 6 of us, we had 2 minutes.
Oh God.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And of course, with that time, you may not have time to go through absolutely everything on your costume. So you want to reverse your judging as much as humanly possible. Personally, I like to go from head to toe because it helps me remember that, oh, I did this, and talking that way. But I organize my build books in techniques, because the technique is documented there once, but I can say, oh, I employed it on this, and then like move down, and oh yeah, this is also applique, like,
I
but
tend
make
to
it make
like,
sense.
yeah, I try to do top to bottom, because then I don't forget a lot of things. Like, one of my last judging experiences, I did Splash Free Haru from Free Awitobi Swim Club, and I had a lot of like hidden pieces. That outfit is a lot of just layers, and so I just kind of started on the top of my head, and I just worked my way down each layer until I made it to my feet, and that just kind of helps give me a guide. I'm not bouncing around and forgetting pieces.
And I'm a little bit different. That's mostly because I go with what frustrated me the most and why I'm so happy that I completed it. And then I bounce around to other things, and it's just, but my brain's organized a little bit differently than other people. So I do recommend head to toe as well. I
Whatever
will
works for you.
recommend starting real quick with your prop though, so that you can lay it down and they can examine it, and then you can go head to toe if you have a prop.
That's a good one. No, and another thing that is quite common is if you have made a change from the reference to what's on your body, explain why. Generally, judges will be more receptive to, oh, I have breasts, but I'm cosplaying a guy. So I modified this to have a shirt underneath. Generally, you're not going to lose points for that, because they can understand that not everybody can open chest bind.
Or the opposite. I have a chest, but you can't see because it's so small. So I use silicone, and now you can. and I actually had one judge chase me out of the room because I forgot to tell him where I had acquired this chest piece and how I'd modified it so it fit me properly, because my shoulders were too big. So I had to adjust the silicone backing, and he was so curious because he needed one too, and he had the same problem. So.
And another thing that you do not want to talk about in judging is what you messed up on.
Ever. Never.
That will probably lose you points.
And also, don't down talk yourself. We're so excited to see you here. You worked so hard. We definitely want to hear you be as biased about your own work as you can in that moment, and you just brag about everything. Go
Whenever
for it.
I'm judging, I usually learn more from novices, because they're not like hardwired into these are the techniques and these are how they're performed. They're gonna be like, so I made this prop, but my dad had a bunch of upholstery foam, so I just made upholstery foam and carved it out, and then I sealed it with this. And I'm like, you did what? I'm doing that next time. Like, I've learned so much from people who have this small, no confidence, because they're like, I'm sorry, I use this terrible technique. It's like, no, that's amazing. So like, focus on how good you did, not how bad you do.
And try and avoid the words simple and easy, because you are downplaying, sorry, you are downplaying what you have made, and you don't want to do that. You want to build yourself up, and
Unless you're trying to say, hey, this design was simple and easy, so I made it more elaborate, then that's okay.
Or
yeah.
like, back to the example of the Sailor Fuku, that it is technically simple, but you are also held to higher finishing standards because there are less pieces
And creating that V in those skirts, if you're going to decide, it's really hard to get that V to sit along the hip line properly. Those rolls are annoying as snot to pull out and re-stuff, so you definitely have done a lot of work. Don't downplay your work.
Mm-hmm. And I have seen this being asked a lot online, because a lot of people have gotten into competition during, well, not during the pandemic, but they got into cosplay ending the pandemic, and are like, yeah, I wanna compete. People are wondering if you can get an exception, like, oh, I can't make judging time this time, can I do it now, this other time, or I have really high anxiety, can I have extra time to judge? The answer will always be no. If you cannot meet the requirements given by the convention, it's not a good idea to compete.
So we do have some accommodations in my state.
Oh, really?
If you do suffer from high anxiety, or you struggle being around people, what you can do is you can send someone in your stead, as long as
Oh,
you.
that's not, like, we don't do that here.
Yeah, you can send someone in your stead as long as they've taken a video of that day. We will check the timestamp of you doing a full turnaround and showing the really important items of your outfit. And then we also allow where if you have an exception, something happened and it's an emergency, as long as you make it 30 minutes before the cutoff, we will give you at least 1 minute. And that's it. You don't get the standard time, but you do get 1 minute.
For the more strict cons, what we recommend, unfortunately, our area is not so nice.
Well, it's Arizona, and sometimes everything melts, and we're just like, we understand.
No, so what I recommend is if there's something like, I'm not good at talking, but I'm good at sewing, or I'm not good at this, is prepare your 2 minutes with your judge to be for that. You can have pictures or flashcards. You can always practice with friends. A lot of the times the judges will also let somebody in the room with you, and they can't talk or help, but they can be your emotional support.
Yeah, we allow handlers that are to be present for
yeah,
support.
But
yeah,
if like having flashcards helps you, that's not going to dock you any points. You can have your flashcards. That's totally fine. As long as you got your 2 minutes, you're good.
Yeah.
So we always recommend there are ways around it. You just have to get.
But if you know that's going to happen, communicate with the staff much further in advance than a day or two, because if it's a day or two, yeah, the answer is going to be no. But if you're communicating a week or 2 weeks in advance because you know this is going to be a problem, they will have a higher probability of offering concessions, at least in my state and some of the other places I've attended, because they understand that not everybody operates the same way.
And another thing to keep in mind during judging is, don't tell the judges only how much time it took you to make something. They care about the construction, not the time. However, time spent can be mentioned, but don't make that your only talking point.
Because some people, for instance, I made a Thancreos costume from Mass Effect. It only took me 100 hours. Now that sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, because I hand sculpted my own mask, cast it out of silicone, painted it, did all these other things that should have taken me weeks or months. I do so much research in advance that I execute very quickly.
And
Not
you also did
everybody
some
does
techniques that you knew what
Right.
you were doing, so you
Yeah,
were able to
and
kind of
so
bust them out.
so
at
I
a
bust out much
rate.
faster. So like if I said 100 hours, they're like, what? And it actually would kind of be me downplaying myself. Instead, I walk through the techniques and things like that.
Yeah, and time doesn't necessarily mean quality. Example, my first invisible zipper took me an hour and a half to put in. I hated that thing, and it looked like hot garbage. The seam was, because invisible zippers, you shouldn't be able to see any of the zipper teeth. It looked terrible. But now, with practice, I can put one in near flawlessly in 20 minutes. So that just goes to show that 1, practice makes perfect, and 2, time doesn't equate to good quality.
Is there anything? I think we've covered judging pretty
Yeah, no,
effectively.
I
don't
think
think there's anything else.
Pretty good. One thing though, some conventions do offer feedback. SoccerCon does like an email thing.
Which
if
I'm
you
jealous
want-
for, and I'm gonna try and convince the con crew to let me do that this year.
You should. No,
It's
very
amazing.
beneficial because like, while the judges may not remember absolutely everything, good judges will take at least short notes during judging, so they can give you even 2-sentence feedback. Because SoccerCon gets an email list of these are the competitors that they want feedback for. They send it to the judges. The judges go over their notes and send it back to the coordinator that then sends the compiled stuff to each competitor, individually, of course.
And Kumo does it where each entry has basically like a little pamphlet or a couple pieces of paper where the judges are taking notes. And at the end of the day, you can actually go get your pamphlet and see what they wrote down.
And that can really help for figuring out where your problem areas were and doing better in your next.
Yeah, the only thing I would like to add is every single competition, even in the exact same building, will be completely different because it's judge bias. So if one competition you enter and it didn't do very well, and so then you're hesitant to enter into another competition, do it anyways. Because all of your judges are looking at different things. You don't have the same judge, which means they don't have the same brain, they don't have the same judge, like, thing that they were looking at on your costume. So if you do a piece and you're really proud of it and it didn't win the first time, go ahead and enter it into another one. If it's in the rules, you can. Because you're gonna be up against different judges that are looking at different things. So it might fare better, or you might get better feedback because you're dealing with a completely different person.
Well, and your judging may go better because you have that initial experience and then you can improve upon it. The other thing is, every competition is different because of the skill level that your competitors bring to the table. This year's SakuraCon was insane. Anybody who entered the competition 10 minutes after the form drop did not get in. You had to, it was insane.
We entered 2 minutes and got waitlisted.
Yeah, no, we were within the first 5 minutes and we got waitlisted.
Yeah.
But this,
Because the masters category is just massive.
no, every category was massive.
I mean, that's true, right?
Everyone brought such good skills to the table. I follow some of the judges on social media and they're like, why do you make this so hard? Like, everybody did such high standards this year, which is absolutely amazing. But that also means all of these people who didn't win, may take these to other conventions, and that pool of talent and hard work is different. So at the end of the day, at competition, if you win, you are the best of what was presented that day. So do keep that in mind, especially if you are doing like smaller competitions. We will touch on that at the end if we have time. But
We should probably move off judging. We covered a lot, yeah.
yes, we have 10 minutes, so we'll try and get through.
I can bust this out. This is my jam.
Performances, which is skit. SakuraCon has started calling it performance. But basically it's what you do when you are on stage, because yes, it is a craftsmanship competition, but the judges have not decided the winners until after they see your walk-on or skit, which factors into your final score for the competition. So for a walk-on, generally you have between 30 seconds and 45 seconds to get on the stage. And there's generally 2 different styles you can do. A standard walk-on, which you'd pick 3 places on the stage, go to 1 place and pose. Go to a 2nd place and pose. Go to a 3rd place, pose, and then leave the stage. Generally, you will be offered custom music. Not every convention allows that.
Yeah, some
But, like,
conventions,
SakuraCon
they're gonna
does.
be streamed live, so they have copyright to concern themselves with, and they have to use royalty-free music, and so you can't bring your own.
And I understand that not everyone is super big into performing, but as a judge, one of my favorite things is when somebody rocks their walk-on. When they literally weren't signed up for a skit, but they go up there and they show off their costume and the personality of a character. One of my biggest losses in competition was because the person's walk-on was so much better than mine. Like, I had a pretty generic walk-on, and I will admit it was pretty generic. The chick in front of me had this one-piece costume, and she was so sassy. You knew exactly what kind of character she was when she walked up there. We had the exact same thing. We were both walk-ons, it was both 30 seconds, but she nailed it. And that's what won. And so, like, even if you're just doing a walk-on turn, try to add personality to it so you stand out amongst the other walk-ons.
Because we had, I've had a judge, I've done Tucson Comic Con and judged there before, and there was this one Beto cosplayer that she had a lot of construction issues, but oh my goodness, she owned that stage so hard, the crowd lost their mind, and we were like, no, she has to have an award, I don't care, man, like, that was amazing.
And also, you can make your walk-on something extra. So like, if your character is like a Vocaloid and you are like, oh, I love this song, and you want to learn to dance, pick like 30 seconds, 45 seconds of that dance and do that on stage as your walk-on. just because it's short doesn't mean if you have a really cool idea, you have to just do like the standard. Because judges love to see you being extra.
Mhm.
That brings us to skits though. Generally, these are 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Again, check your rules because it's not standard across the board. Sakura breaks it down into
Comedy, drama,
yeah, comedy, drama,
musical.
yeah, and best in show.
That's true.
But generally, you'll want to decide if you're doing a skit. Are you doing like a dance skit? Are you doing like a voiced skit? And then if that, are you telling a story? Are you making it comedic?
And don't try to make it too obscure. Like, if not everybody may not know, everyone may not know the series that you're referencing. So make sure it's something that could pull in heartstrings very easily, or
That's-
something that's so funny they're gonna laugh regardless if they know what it is.
That's what I wanted to touch on really fast is one of our wonderful favorite competitors and good friend of ours, Autumn Cosplay, taught me something really cool. Write your script and give it to somebody who has no idea what the hell the series is. If they read it and go, what is this? You did it wrong. Because you have to assume your judges have no idea who you are, and you have to assume that your group of people watching have no idea what this show is. So you want to make the most generic thing as creatively as possible. And so letting people who don't know what it is read it ahead of time helps give you a good gauge of, will the audience understand what I'm doing, even if they don't know who I am? One of our biggest losses is because we brought a D&D skit that we realized afterwards that only D&D players probably understood most of our references.
So you generally want to dumb it down, but still keep like key things in your skit.
If you want a good example of skits to watch, go to the World Cosplay Summits. My absolute favorite thing in the whole freaking world, and this is the best skit I've ever seen in my life, is from last year's. There's a Final Fantasy from last year. It's one of the video one of the videos they won, and it's this Final Fantasy one that the entire thing, even if you don't know the series, was gorgeous and breaks your heart immediately.
But you didn't have to know the context.
And then if you did know the series, it was even worse.
And another thing that you're being graded on is mixing and choreography. So if you are doing like a dance skit, you're basically just cutting your music. And if you're doing like a talking skit, you have to make sure that when people are recording their lines, they are clear, that everyone has similar mics, or the person who's doing your mixing can change levels and like reverb and whatnot to make things sound the same. And that can be very frustrating and hard, but that's certainly something you have to keep in mind and that you are being judged on.
Here's a master hack. If you have a microphone at home that's picking up a lot of noise, put a piece of EVA foam behind you when you're talking, because it's going to reflect your voice back and take the noise down. Or you can buy soundboards, but EVA works.
Yes. We have like 4 minutes, so
Sorry.
So I'm not really gonna talk much about the awards, but generally these
Because they vary so much, it's
breakdowns.
really hard, yeah.
Every con has different awards for every single thing.
And in addition to this, you'll also have Best in Show, which is like the best of the best that showed excellence in both craftsmanship and the stage presence.
And you might have some like in Arizona we break up youth. If you're under 15, you can't compete with adults. We don't allow it. We have curfews, so we have to have certain laws where, because our masquerades go so late, you can't be out. So we have different rules, and so those might even be completely separate. And you might have the first half of it for the youth, then they have to leave and go home, and then the rest is those who are older.
Or they just don't allow anybody.
Yep.
Because I think Sakura is 14 and up, but do not quote me on that.
Double check your rules, always vote.
Yep.
I don't know how many times we're gonna say this in this panel, please, but double check your rules.
Yes. So the last thing we want to touch on is competition sizes. So if you are competing at a smaller
This
convention,
bit me in the butt.
there's going to be a smaller pool of contestants, and generally you will, not always, but this is the trend I've seen, see lower quality. And this is generally actually a good thing, because I highly encourage people to attend and compete in smaller conventions to get a feel for what a competition is.
There's
Because
not
something
as
like-
much stress, right?
Exactly,
Yeah,
something
not
like
pressure.
SoccerCon for your first competition can be extremely overwhelming because you're held to such stringent standards without possibly knowing what's going on, and that's another reason we run this panel. I know with conventions like SoccerCon, often you get waitlisted, and there's a higher level of craftsmanship even at novice. Like this year's novices, like, oh dear lord, it's beautiful. But I do want to say, be very careful about competing at too many small competitions. Because if you are racking up awards at smaller competitions, and then you suddenly are like, oh, well, I've won 7 awards in this small convention circuit, and oh, I'm gonna go to Masters at SoccerCon. Just because you've won all of those awards doesn't mean your level of craftsmanship is necessarily at what SoccerCon would consider a master. And that also goes back to the point of it's the best of what is brought to the convention at that time. And just because you don't win at like one competition, don't let that discourage you from continuing to compete, because if your heart is really in this, just keep going even if you're losing, because some of the best friends that I've made have been in the green room, and it's such an amazing learning experience to like learn how somebody made something, or like learn a new technique. Like yesterday Thermo said the glue thing.
The fabric glue?
Yeah, fabric glue in
On
acrylic
EVA foam.
paint.
Yeah, if you're painting EVA foam, I just like to mix acrylic with fabric glue so it stays flexible.
You will always learn something new from the people around you.
And we are out of time.
We're sorry.
I'm sorry we don't have time for questions. Thermo actually has been recording, so if you want.
We'll also step
I'll
outside for a second if anybody has any burning questions.
Yeah, thank you so